All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am hugely honoured to actually meet Aiden Minnis in person. You'll remember him from a previous interview that we did online, but Aiden, thank you so much for agreeing to join me. And I'm going to have to go back through some of the previous questions that we went through before for those who haven't seen that previous one. But I'd like you to give people a bit of a run-up and background as to how we're standing here with you in the Russian army and about to deploy to the special military operation.
I was just an ordinary citizen, just working, doing what everyone else does, do what everyone else did, just living life. And then, of course, 2014, this whole situation unfolded in what was then Ukraine at the time. And then that's when things changed for me, and I started awakening to the issues that were really going on there. So then it changed from becoming just a ordinary citizen to now becoming a soldier of the Russian armed forces.
Okay, so you're working in England.
Yes.
It is in England specifically.
Yes.
So you're from an Irish family, but you're in England.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you say, everything kicks off with a special military operation. How much did you know about the situation in Donbass before?
Well, I've always liked history, and I've always been aware of, because of my Irish heritage, I've always been aware of politically what Britain and the West get up to around the world.
Particularly Northern Ireland and that history there?
Or the North of Ireland, depending on
North of Ireland, yeah, okay.
It's not just there. And then, of course, in the early 2000s, when you had Tony Blair, it was, you start seeing Iraq, Afghanistan, and the famous paper from America, which was like the Axis of Evil, which mentioned 7 countries. So I was always aware of that. So when they told me that, when the news were telling me that a coup was unfolding. Well, it wasn't a coup at the time. I think it was, I don't know what they call it. When it's like pro-Western, it's the people are rising up for democracy.
It's a democratic change of government if the West does it.
So I kind of knew there was more to it. And then the more I started looking into alternative sources and alternative news, and then going to Telegram and finding pro-Russian, well, I say pro-Russian pages, they would be considered pro-Russian in Britain. But I started developing my own understanding of it, and I got to the point where you knew it wasn't what they were telling you. You could see videos of the ethnic Russian people, which I think that's what they would be labeled now, trying to stand up to this coup, and you're getting like snipers employed from Georgia, which were like killing protesters to try and amplify the situation.
Just to ask you about your sources there, you mentioned Telegram, but was there any specific channel that you educated yourself on? Like, I don't know, there's Patrick Lancaster, Graham Phillips, even Eva Bartlett. There's a few Western journalists that were covering this from, let's say, the Russian perspective or the perspective of the people from Donbass. Yeah,
definitely Eva Bartlett. She's actually a great journalist. I followed a lot of her work, especially when she went to Gaza and Syria. So, of course, she was one of the journalists I first followed. And then, of course, Patrick Lancaster, you could actually watch it live whilst it was actually happening, especially his coverage of Mariupol when you really started seeing quite graphic videos, actually, including female victims of what the Azov did to them with swastikas carved into their chest and left naked on the floor. There's one of his videos is quite famous. And yourself as well, I think you were Earl Grey at the time. I followed you. Graham Phillips, not so much. It wasn't until I got to Russia that I knew who he was. Then, of course, I followed the Russian channels, RT, and I can't pronounce the other one. She's might be Zvezda. It's like blue and white writing, yes?
I'm not wholly familiar, but you bring me to a good point where pretty much most people you just listed on most channels have been blocked.
Yes.
So
VPN.
VPN if you're motivated to. But my question is, why do you think the West has been so? It was very quick to jump onto that after we saw the beginning of the special military operation. Ursula von der Leyen again, straight on the crusade against Russian media. But it wasn't just Russian media; it was individuals, some of whom you've just mentioned. I believe Graham Phillips, not only blocked but then sanctioned. This reaction from the West, how and why do you think that came about?
Well, I think you have an elite class within Britain, and that elite class have always been inherently anti-Russian. I don't know how much of that goes back to the time where the Russian royal family were executed by the Bolsheviks. So I'm not sure if it goes back before then or whether that was really the start of it. It might actually go back to the original Crimean Wars, which I think the British were involved in.
Oh yeah.
But if you were to go to like modern day, I think a lot of that is to do with Vladimir Putin, because when he became president in 1999, I think, at that time, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the living standards in Russia in the 90s was probably comparable to the Great Depression of the 30s in America.
Yeah.
And at that time, you had all these oligarchs, which were criminals, effectively, financed by Western intelligence services to buy up all the natural resources. And then, of course, they gained massive leverage, massive control. And when Putin came to power, within a few years, he had already reversed that. And that's why he could never be a friend. And that's why he was always destined to be an enemy, because he stopped their gravy train, effectively.
Which then leads me to, what about your other countrymen? So you've made this huge decision, which you will be termed as nothing short of a traitor. Mm-hmm. I'm sure much worse in the media. What's been the reaction to you from home?
Depending on who you ask, if we're talking the general public, those sentiments will be agreed with. Most of the population, they're conditioned and I would say brainwashed to such an extent by the media, which their natural default position would be pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian. And of course, they've somehow attached it to like the British Army, and I don't understand why, because you've had like, I think what's his name, Colonel Richard Kemp, mm-hmm. he's the one that is trumpeting this position of being a traitor and being against the British Armed Forces and against the British state. So of course I've received a lot of death threats from service members. I would say trolls and intelligence services, Troll Farms, Brigade 77. But it's not just me. I can part with that, but my family too have received those exact death threats. A member of my family was actually attacked due to me being in Russia.
Actually attacked?
Yes, physically attacked. Yes, and of course, nothing happened to the other person despite a police report going in.
When was this? Approximately after. So you've come to Russia?
Yes, I think I was. So these probably happened maybe a month after the newspaper reports started coming out. So of course, traitor and all those headlines, which you're aware of.
I'm aware of, but is it fair to say that incited these people to act this?
Oh, of course it does. When you get people like, I think Matt Roper started this, because he originally messaged me.
He's from the Mirror, isn't he?
Yes. Yeah. So he deliberately. He will deliberately inflame the situation, and here's the way that he writes it. So if you're going to write traitor to your country, and then calling me a far right member, which I've challenged him time and time again to provide paperwork, provide proof that I was a member of this far right organization, which I probably shouldn't name because I don't want to give them credence, scumbags that they are. And what that would then do is people are then, of course, going to think that I'm the enemy, I'm a traitor, so it's written in paper, so it must be true. And then, of course, that's what happens.
But then they can't attack you, so then they lash out at your family member. Was it a very close family member, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, I mean, they share the same blood as me, so
right.
They're a very close family member. And then, of course, I have situations like my children have to change their last names to go to school because obviously they're also getting trouble,
And this is subsequent to this hit piece by Matt Roper, among others. It wasn't just him, but wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's flip that round then. What support have you had, if any?
Well, I've had a lot of support since being in Russia. They've been, I'd say 99.9% really decent with me, really supportive. They've helped me in many ways. In terms of people back home, there's like an undercurrent of people that actually do support the Russian special military operation, that do support Russia. Mm-hmm. But of course, if these people were to speak out, they lose their jobs and stuff like that.
Certainly publicly, yes.
Yeah, if you were to publicly speak out on your social media and someone decides that they've got a problem with that, you'll lose your job. You can end up losing your home, like with what happened to Graham with doing a bit of journalism, speaking out. He gets all these sanctions. I think they sanctioned his bank account and tried taking his house or family member's house or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is what they do. But I've had many people contact me from back home, even fellow countrymen wanting to join the special military operation.
Wow. So even other people, kind of, let's say like yourself. So these are people who've educated themselves, realized what the truth is, and then like yourself, been motivated to make the trip all the way to Russia.
Yeah, 100%. These people are not stupid. They're not necessarily inspired by me alone. I think they'd obviously have some idea of the British and Western establishments and what they do around the world, destabilizing countries and whatnot, and interference. So there has to be a base of that kind of understanding in their minds for them to then want to do this,
So you're the example that's then given them, proved it's possible.
I say unfortunately. I don't mean unfortunately. I mean, unfortunately, maybe in terms of back home, which are vilify me even more. But of course, I believe in what I'm doing. So if these people contact me and they wholeheartedly believe in it, like I do, and they want to help, then sure, I'll help if I can. And
they have done.
Yes, I mean, there's one person who I'm aware of that's recently come to Russia, and he's in the process of joining the Russian army.
It was much more important, and I felt like I had to get involved somehow, because I think if people don't get involved, eventually it's going to result in the whole world being destroyed.
Then let's talk a little bit about your experience to date in the Russian army.
Yes.
So you've been to some of the hot places, let's say, on the front lines. What's been your experience there so far?
Kremenaya was probably the hottest place. We ended up on a camp there within the first few days of deploying. We had to evacuate the camp because it came under fire. So that was an experience within, you could do all the training in the world, and you can simulate explosions and gunfires with blanks and stuff like that. But when you're actually facing it and you can hear it going off and you can feel the shockwaves going through your body, it's something else. And there were times I really had to take a deep breath, like to try and ground myself to, like, right, this is real. So luckily we were kind of okay. So we were tasked with evacuating the camp, whilst the I think it may have been the Rus Guard. I'm not entirely sure who we were on the camp with. They went out to engage the Ukrainians, which gave us enough time to evacuate the camp.
Yeah, so for orderly withdrawal.
Yeah, so we managed to do that. But then within a week or so, they took that camp back and gained 7-8 kilometers. So it was these things happen. But for my first experience of war, I mean, it was quite something. But luckily for me, I didn't have to go out and engage the enemy. I was tasked with just clearing the camp with a few of the other guys, so I was quite lucky.
So engineering support.
Yes.
Right. Let's go into that. So how, unfortunately, it's a difficult question for you to answer, as well as myself. I've been in the British Army, but not the Russian Army. You've been in the Russian Army, but not the British Army. But from what you've gathered, from what you know, what can you say about the difference of tactics, perhaps, of the Russian armed forces versus not just Ukrainian, but even the Western one? I'll give you an example. The shock and awe that we saw in Tony Blair's days of just missiles raining in indiscriminately. We've seen, I think it's fair to say, we've seen a repeat of that in Gaza.
Yes.
Just shock and awe, just obliterate the enemy.
Exactly
what you call the enemy. It doesn't matter if they're combatants or not, as we saw in Iraq and we're seeing in Gaza. Is that the same thing that is going on with the Russian army? Because that's what the Kiev Independent and the Ukrainian media will tell you, that it's just shock and awe. Russia just
right. So I'm aware of something in particular. I mean, it's public knowledge, so it's not like I'm speaking out of turn or giving away secrets. But I know at the start of this operation, there was a problem within command for this exact reason, because Vladimir Putin didn't want to do a shock and awe campaign, and he wanted to limit civilian casualties. You had to go through 3 or 4 different commanders to get approval to drop rockets and drop bombs on certain areas, which were then given Ukraine the time to withdraw their troops.
So, for example, like we saw, like Patrick Lancaster, among others, showed us, for instance, in Mariupol, where the Ukrainians parked a grad, for instance, a military object in a kindergarten.
Yes.
You're saying that took a lot of time for commanders to get the approval to actually successfully engage that target.
Yes,
Right.
yes. So well, it was that would to start off with. I don't think it's. I think they've sped things up considerably now. But
So, what, are you now saying they don't care if there's a
no,
grad
no,
in
no,
the
no.
kindergarten?
Of course they care. I mean, I think a lot of the battles now are not. You know, Mariupol is probably a case sort of on its own, because obviously it's a big city. I think of probably nearly 1 million people, maybe.
It's a big city, yeah.
So,
So I think what you mean to say it's been streamlined and lessons have been learned and built on experience.
the reason why I mentioned that, I think the reason the importance of me mentioning that is because the Russians are not out to kill civilians, and they took preparations in order to limit civilian casualties. And if you were to follow any reputable organization that carry out these statistics and find out these statistics of civilians killed, I mean, you could probably, it's been going on 2.5 years now, maybe, and civilian casualties, for instance, compared to the civilian casualties in Gaza. With what,
Absolutely, yeah. The UN
so you can literally see in real time by those figures that Russia have actually gone out of their way to limit civilian casualties.
I'll give you actually a personal example that you can comment on because of your training in the Russian armed forces. So I served with Americans, and there was a difference even then between British training on, for instance, fighting in built-up areas, FIBUA as we called it. The Americans will very much throw as much lead at the problem as possible and then mop up, whereas the British would take 2 guys and storm room by room. It sometimes meant more casualties, but you limited the collateral damage, as we call it. What's been your training? Has it been more of the American, just throw as much ammunition as possible and then go through the rubble afterwards, or is it a case of more surgical tactics? So you're not a missile commander.
No. So if I were to talk me personally, obviously with the engineers, most of the training we did was like technical work, so we didn't really deal with that kind of training. But now I'm in the storm battalions, or the assault brigades, assault battalions, infantry, I suppose. Yeah, we deal a lot with we would storm areas, so it wouldn't be a case of just flattening buildings, because you're going to kill civilians that way, and of course they want to limit as much as possible, especially when most of these areas which are being battled over are in the Donbass, so of course they're ethnic Russian, so they're Russian civilians. So,
we see in Mariupol they want to rebuild and regenerate, so it doesn't make sense to.
So my training per se would be, so if we were to assault buildings, it would be in tactical groups, not necessarily flattening the buildings. But of course, we've also seen many cases of, and they're very good at it, and they've done it again in Kiev, where the Russians were accused of bombing a hospital. If you see some videos, which you won't see in the West, you'll see multiple soldiers being carried out of those buildings. So
we see those staged.
So this is what they do.
What about the likes of Chasiv Yar, though? I mean, and there's been other places that have ended up. Rubezhnya, Avdiivka was a recent city that was almost obliterated. Was that through the training of the Russians to just go in and obliterate, or what was
not necessarily. I mean, it's war, so buildings are going to get damaged. I'm pretty sure most of the city. I say most of the city. I think Ukraine announced that they were trying to evacuate Avdiivka, but I don't think most of them wanted to go. But it's not just a case of Russia attacking Avdiivka. Once they take these areas, or they start occupying is the wrong word, liberating these certain areas, and then what will happen is you'll get rockets start flying from the other side. So it's not a case of Russia going in, flattening these buildings. So when you see these pictures in Western press of these buildings not existing, that's not necessarily Russia that have done that.
Let's shift from civilians then. What about Ukrainian captives? Have you experienced anyone being taken prisoner from the Ukrainian side? Have you seen any treatment of them? I spoke to them personally.
No, I've not spoken to any Ukrainian soldiers. I suppose, luckily, in a way, I didn't really have to. The first time I went to the Donbass, the majority of the work we did there was technical, so we didn't actually get to see most of that. But no, we've so for instance, if I know when I go this time, I will do. So if I'm going to explain it, our commander said to us that if they're going to offer to surrender, then take them prisoner. If they're wounded, try and help them. But then, of
I
course,
don't
it
mean to be
depends
too
if you're...
funny, but here's an example from British Army training. There's a man on the ground, hand behind his head. He might be alive, he might be dead, but there's a body there. Maybe you've taken him prisoner, but one thing certainly to check if he was alive or
booby
dead.
traps.
Well, first of all, you kick him in the balls from behind.
Yeah,
then you get behind him, roll him over to check for the booby traps.
Yeah, they've taught us those things in training. Yes.
Okay,
yes,
so similar. My point there being was there's these set routines for taking a prisoner or checking a body. Booby trapping, as you say, was very common. Certainly in the early part of the SMO, we saw some casualties taken by Russia in these instances. So you have been given training for taking prisoners. Any mention of the Geneva Convention, of certain standards or codes, or
yeah, there will do, but then of course, yeah, we do know that, we do know this, we're told this,
right.
you know, because you can't go out murdering people, but of course, if you're faced with a loaded gun, then of course, you know, all bets are off. But if there's someone injured on the floor, then if you can help them, help them. But of course,
someone's
you have to be
hands
very
up,
careful.
they come out of a foxhole, hands up. I don't want to fight. White flag.
But then the problem you have is you also come up against these fascist battalions, and of course, you know.
Yeah, that is a very good point to make. Sometimes they'll even kill their own to stop them doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move from prisoners then. Have you actually met any other Americans, Europeans on, I guess, either side? You mentioned there's some others in your unit. Have you come across them? Others in?
So I've met a Spanish guy, an Italian guy, a Swedish guy. So I've met a few Europeans. I've met
Italian, Swedish. What was the other one?
Italian, Swedish, and Spanish.
Okay, interesting. Swedish, I didn't expect. Italian, kind of, they're pretty friendly towards Russia. Spanish,
I think it's a bit 50-50 with Spanish, or from the Spanish-speaking countries. I think I think you got swaths of them on both sides. But most of the ones, because this is the regular army, and it's not the inter-brigades or the PMCs, you know. So most of the people here will be 99% Russian or ex-Soviet Union countries, you know, surrounding countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union. So, but in terms of English speakers, I've not met any. I'm aware of them. I've not personally met any Irish, American, or British, but I'm also keen. I'm also acutely aware that there is many within the inter-brigades and PMCs.
Yeah, for those now. Based on your experience, I mean, what would be your advice to people who also want to do the same as you?
So if you're coming here because you want to live a real life video game, don't.
And Call of Duty.
Yeah, if you're coming here just because you want to pick up a weapon and kill, don't. If you want to come here because you think it's an adventure and you want to change your life because you're miserable, don't. I would say that you have to believe it in your heart. If you truly believe what the Russians are doing is righteous, and you know the Lord's work is what I say quite often, and I firmly believe it, then absolutely come and do it. But you have to realize that by doing this is going to change your life. You know, especially if you come from an English, Western-speaking country. So if you were to come from America, Britain, Australia, Canada, you know, somewhere where they speak English, they're going to destroy your life. They're going to go after your family. You will never be able to go back home again. So you have to really mean it, and you have to really want to do it for the right reasons. So
I guess your family has to support you too if they're going to face that.
Some will, some won't. So it's kind of like as an individual decision, really. If you can have family that support you and they're aware of you, that you want to go and do this, then fantastic. You just have to be very wary of the consequences and the backlash that you're going to face with doing it. But if you truly believe in your heart it's the right thing to do, to, you know, save the people of the Donbass, to liberate the Donbass, fight for Russia and Russians, you know, and for a multipolar world, which, you know, if we go on to, if you were to sort of take it to a bigger picture, that's what it really truly is, then come and do it, but do it for the right reasons. That's my advice. Do it for the right reasons.
Okay. Sorry.
So I'm not sure if that comes across as
advice, but I would then add on to that, whilst you can, because we saw very early on at the beginning of the SMO, many Russians, as the Western media like to point out, left Russia, but they did so unhindered.
Yes.
They were allowed to. President Putin even addressed that. Do you think the West would allow such an exodus of its people to Russia?
Well, no, clearly they don't, because anyone going to Russia, well, I'd say sort of the people that I'm aware of, I'm not talking soldiers or people even wanting to come in volunteer for the Russian army. I've got many Russian friends. A lot of them used to live in the UK. They get problems anytime they want to come to and fro. So if they want to go to Russia and come back, there's issues. They're going to get stopped. They're going to get questioned.
Who by?
When I was questioned, I was questioned by the terrorism squad, basically the police. So anti-terror squad. I don't know what their official name is, but this is who you will speak to. So it might be a case of you just speak to border patrol, but if you're Russian, the likelihood is you will speak to someone from the anti-terror squad.
YouTubers I've seen who visited Russia then went back west. The Estonians made them miss buses, held them up for 6 hours.
Yes, they do this.
So
I nearly missed. So if I'm talking from my personal experience, I got on. They had to walk me to my flight, which I bet they regret doing that now. But everyone was already seated. They delayed the flight by 5 minutes to get me on there. So, which I was quite surprised at, considering how this is developed. I think they kind of knew what I was doing, but they couldn't prove it.
Gosh.
But yeah, they're just normal Russian citizens I know. I've got a few Russian friends that live in Britain, and they go to and from. They get issues every single time. They get stopped, and they've been made to miss flights, as you said.
Okay, let's move on to something else then. We've seen how strongly Russia has stood up, not just for itself, actually. It's been really for far more than just Russia. We've seen the global south being represented. We've seen African countries now legislate against LGBT practices. They've said we don't want any of that. Russia has also said we want traditional values. The West, on the other hand, they believe in butchering children. They believe in indoctrinating them, even inappropriate curriculums in school. Russia has shown what it's willing to do for its people, its ideas, its way of life. Would the West do the same, do you think? Would they fight tooth and nail to protect LGBT in schools, of changing genders as you feel?
Well, you know as well as I do that the not just British, but you got American, Canadian, New Zealand, Australian. They kind of move in lockstep. They go out of their way to such a militant degree. It's almost fascism at this point.
I think it's fair to say.
And yeah, they go out of their way to make sure this happens, because if you're a parent that you're concerned and you try and speak out, again, not only will they destroy your life, they'll try and take your kids off you. I mean, there's cases in America, there's documentaries done by Matt Walsh, I think was one of the names, where this family had their kid taken off of them just because they didn't want to agree with them changing genders and having, chemicals put into their body, and they won't even reach puberty at that point.
I'm told the Germans are quite fond of that practice of taking people's children away. A political case I was told of recently. But then my point is, if the West was threatened, you can't have your LGBT. Will the people rise up? And like we've seen, hundreds of thousands of volunteers like yourself in Russia of its own population have gone to the recruitment offices saying, I'm willing to fight to defend this society I'm in. How many Westerners do you think will go to the recruitment offices and say, yes, LGBT is what I want to, that's the hill I want to die on?
Yeah, actually not many, because you've got a case here of it's the minority, the loud minority ruling over the majority, because it's an agenda. It's a world agenda. You could probably go into the World Economic Forum and that kind of
social
nonsense.
engineering.
Social engineering. I'm glad you said that. So it is a social engineering. If you talk all NATO countries, especially Western countries, it's social engineering at its finest. They want to break the family unit. They want to break the communities. Hardly any neighbour speaks to each other anymore. They don't even know who they are half the time. So no, the majority of people actually wouldn't. It's a minority. The difference is, in Russia, is they stick up for family values, and it isn't even done in the same militant way. It's just naturally done because that's what people want. So, and you've heard Putin say many times, he's not against gay people. He's not against people that want to live different and weirder lives. If they want to go and do that in the comfort of their own home, and they're not hurting anybody, and they're not indoctrinating children, have at it. Go do what you want. Because they try in the West try and portray Russia as this kind of homophobic nation that kind of goes around beating up gay people. What they won't tell you is, you go to most cities in Russia, they probably have a gay club here and there. You know what I mean? So it's like, go do your own thing. Don't indoctrinate children. It's like, leave them alone.
Again, I doubt the Russians will thank me for highlighting this, but I did read in the news of trans State Duma representative actually chose to go back to their original gender, but it was a case of where it still is permitted, but that, like you say, it's not that it's not allowed, it's not that it's possible, you don't hear about it because what you do is your choice and how you choose to live is your own. But I'll get to my final question, because Slava Bogu, this will all come to an end at some point, and that's then a personal question for you. What is the end for you? When is the end? And what will your life look like? As we've discussed now, you've pretty much ended your life in the West. You're here now. So after all of this, which I believe will be in favor of Russia and victory in traditional values,
yes,
what will you do?
So this may be a bit of a naive answer, or it may come across as naive. I've not really thought that far ahead. I mean, I'm starting to think about it now because I'm married, but when I came to Russia, I was so focused on doing what I came here to do. It's kind of like that was the only thing in my head. It's like, I will deal with that once it's over. I mean, look, it's not, since I've married, it kind of complicated things. Again, I don't regret coming to Russia. I don't regret marrying, of course. I mean, I'd never hear the end of that if I said that, but so...
Guys, man.
So yeah, I mean, it's Russian victory, but of course, I'm in it, I think, until the end. You know, sometimes, I'm not going to lie, it's hard here. I find it hard with the language. The culture, not so much. It's actually not that different. It's just more, I'd say it's similar to the West in a lot of ways, traditional ways, the way it used to be. So that doesn't bother me per se. I think it's more of a language barrier that sometimes get to me, and you know, sometimes I do miss my family, my kids and stuff. So it's difficult in those ways. But I knew that by coming here, that's my own fault. That's not Russia's fault, you know. So I'm adapting. I'm married now. You know, I have my own family. But of course, despite me having those hard times in my own head sometimes, I'm still determined to fight for Russia, and I'm probably in it until the very end, whenever that is. If it means that escalates into a wider war, then of course it means that I'm in it even more. It would just harden my resolve. But of course, I'm hoping that we can resolve this as quickly as possible, but in a way which benefits the people of the Donbass. You know, I don't want a peace treaty where the Donbass don't feel as though they've got what they needed to get, which I don't think would be the case anyway. So I want peace for the Donbass, liberation for the Donbass, and I want as less civilians killed as possible. Once that happens, I can then think about what I want to do after that. I'm not quite sure. I mean, the world's my oyster. Maybe I'll write a book. Maybe I'll write some poetry. I don't know.
Fantastic
idea. I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, you've certainly got not just my gratitude, but I think the gratitude of many others, and I think that's across the spectrum, Western, Russian as well. So huge respect to you. Thank you so much.
Well, it's an honor, truly, for the Russian people.
Likewise, and to meet you in person, and hopefully, God willing, we'll speak to each other again, follow up, and we'll see if any of your answers to those questions have changed in the future. But all the best to you, and we'll be thinking of you, and I'm sure many people watching will want you to keep in touch. Is there anywhere that people can follow you, or...?
I'm on X, Twitter, just type in my name, Aiden Minnis. There's not many with that name. Facebook, same name. Telegram, same name. VK, same name. So they'll know it's me. Just you can tell what's a fake account and what's not a fake account by the amount of followers and certain pictures and certain information on there. So they can follow me on those social medias. Yeah, I'd be happy to accept them.
Well, thanks again.
No problem.